Okay, so hello and welcome everyone that's watching live and those that are watching this afterwards. I presume that lots of you are watching this after we've sent you the email and all those sort of things on this fantastic subject. The reason why I wanted to organise this particular webinar, and we're very grateful to have Rachel doing this for us, and I'll introduce her in a second. But the reason why I wanted this webinar on is, you know, nearly all of the Kickstart employers and all of our employers that we're dealing with as a gateway are doing a fantastic thing. They've created a great opportunity for a young person locally. They're helping their business bounce back. They're getting people off benefits. It's they're giving them additional training. It's a win-win-win-win situation, and very rarely do those things happen. So we wanted, those businesses to get some credit for that, the young person to get some exposure for the hard work and effort they've put in. And as a result, we asked Rachel to put a press release together and do a little webinar to support on how that works. So I probably can't do you justice, Rachel. So do you want to introduce yourself and your background and all those sort of things with that?
Yeah, very happy to, Mark. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Hello from quite blustery Cornwall today. My name is Rachel Hammond, and I spent 20 or so years working as a journalist, senior editor for national press and business to business press. I now run a comms agency from here in the Southwest, and my aim via the business is to take the mystery out of PR and marketing, and essentially to help businesses tell better stories and get the coverage that you all deserve, because it's tough out there. It's hard to raise ourselves above parapet, and press releases is kind of where it all starts, really. It's a often overlooked part of a small business media profile, but hopefully today we'll be taking the mystery out of that. I can give you plenty of tips as you're working through, and I'm on hand to answer questions. Bit of housekeeping, as I said to Mark just before you all joined us, I'm quite happy to take questions today. So pop your hand up or put the wave on in Zoom, and we'll stop and start as we go through. Okay, epic fail there on the presentation. Yeah, so my logo appears to have disappeared there, but I'm Rachel, and you can follow me on social media, where I share a huge stack of tips for storytelling, marketing and PR at the Hammond Agency, or on Twitter as What Rachel Does, which is a reference to my former Twitter handle, which was What Rachel Writes, and a small progression there. So without further ado, do I need a press release? Does your business need a press release? Well, I'm going to say yes, because even in this age of golden social media and always on comms, we've got a whole team of journalists up and down the country who are writing local news, writing industry-specific news, or searching for stories for the local radio. And we like to make their lives easier, and there's no easier way to do that than to produce a press release. 3 essential reasons you want to release, because really you're here because you want to get in the news. You would like to have a story feature in your local, your industry, or possibly even the national press. The other reason is you might want to give people your brand name. You want to be top of mind, you want to be remembered. And ultimately, we want publicity. We want a story that leads to a story. And PR, marketing, they're 2 sides of the same coin, but the beauty about PR is that you're essentially amplifying your marketing budget, because what you're doing with your press release, with your media relations, is you're helping to tell your story by getting other people to tell it for you. And there's no better way than to be featured in the news, to be talked about, to be referred to in conversation, and to watch those conversations build. What is a press release?
Just a question. Sorry, just to support that thing previously. What's your opinion on this as well? Because often we've spoken previously, the business I used to work in, we used to do lots of media and press releases. And one of the main benefits with that, it supported all the other marketing, and it was there kind of, forever. Once someone's written something in a registered press, it very rarely gets taken down. So it's always there to support any other argument. And what's your viewpoint on one of the reasons we used to say to people to get press is because if you tell me you're brilliant, I assume that you're biased. But as soon as a third party tells me you're brilliant, I then think, oh, there must be something in what you're saying. Could you just
absolutely? Yeah, no, for sure. I think that when you're featured on a blog or as a news story, then that gives the business credibility. But when you search for a business name, the most underneath the page 1 and 2 SERPs, what you'll be returned is any media stories. Just as a quick aside, you can always check to see where the news is in your field and for your business name by doing a specific news search in Google, and that will show you all the archives. And actually, I think at the moment it goes back a good 9 or 10 years. In some cases, it goes back even further. So over time, your press profile will build. And in terms of backlinks and SEO, if you've got an incoming link from a credible news source, and even local press here is credible because it's all part of the Reach PLC network. What that's doing is that's signposting people towards your website. So as well as giving you that press coverage, it's also raising your profile and proving some credibility to the business name and the story at hand. So absolutely, I think we used to measure press release impact purely by column inches. That's changed in the digital age, and we're looking at backlinks and volume of readers. But really, on a day-to-day basis, the number of times you can find your brand or business name mentioned online is what you want to build on. So if you do a search now and search for, or after this session, search for your business name and just see where you pop up, it's a really good exercise for everyone to do actually from time to time, I'd say, Mark, because it keeps you in mind of what other people are finding when they search for you or how they might discover you online.
And is it fair to say it's part of your digital footprint as well? If you're doing SEO, if you're doing social media, if you're doing ads, those sort of stuff, this is just part, and it's what I describe as kind of long burn marketing. You know, it's there for a long period of time. It might not, you know, the phone may not ring off the hook the day after something goes in the press, but it's there for forever, isn't it? So
absolutely. And I think the average purchasing journey now is about 30 to 45 days, and you'll maybe have upwards of 17 touch points in that time, which means that you're either making 17 specific searches, or you'll see a brand name 17 times before you make a decision to buy or engage the services of a business. And as part of that digital footprint, it's about consolidation, but it's also about consistency. So if you're presenting across your different social channels, and then you've got a press release story, that's giving a huge weight of credibility. It's also worth remembering that as we've moved into the digital age, we're not just looking at paper print, and we're looking at a lifetime of 24 hours for a newspaper or 2 weeks for a magazine article. We can get value from backlinks for years and years and years. So once that publication, once that link is made and it's there sat on the internet, that's going to be generating some form of traffic to your website or raising your awareness for months, if not years.
It just supports marketing, because you need to send an email to someone, a prospect or something like that. You know, you can just say, look, you don't believe I'm brilliant, here, look at something in the local paper or national
absolutely
paper, whatever it is, and it's that credibility. It's, you know, all those.
I think it's really important, and for small businesses and community-based businesses, I think it's a really nice touch. When you're making your email signature, don't just have your logo. I mean, obviously you need to have your social media handles and your phone address, but actually put your latest press story in there, not necessarily linking to your website, but more of a have you seen us? You know, we were in the Echo, we were on BBC Breakfast, and providing that small link, it shows anyone who you're conversing with that you are having conversations that are worth reading and worth stopping and taking time to listen to.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you, Fly. I just thought.
Absolutely. More than happy. Before we move on, have we got any other questions from anyone else here about what a press release might be used for? Because you know, we're not just talking about how to get seen. I'm quite happy to take questions for maximising impact and where those releases can be used. No? Okay. Let's move on a little bit. And so what is a press release? We tend to work in the industry to all broad spectrums of topic here. The first is news. So this is the absolute news splash. This is the story that will stop us in our tracks. In a business sense, we've rarely got that news that is going to make the front page. And, let's be candid and honest here. What is big news in our own sectors is probably not always the story that the general public or anyone outside our industry wants to read. But in terms of B2B, an announcement or a bulletin is absolutely valid as a press release. This is the story about your business. It might be a milestone, it might be a hire. And in fact, what we're looking at here today with the Kickstart project, actually that's a really, really valid business message for all the reasons that you said, Mark. This is a good news story. This is a positive story for everyone involved. An official statement. Now, these often overlooked, but we're thinking here about profits and losses or company announcements. They're not always newsworthy, but if you think specifically within your industry and the B2B press, then there's generally 4 or 5 reasons to issue an official statement throughout the year. And it's also worth reminding that you may not get the coverage that you expect or want from every single release. But in terms of maximising that digital footprint, this is also about using your press releases to build a relationship with the media that you want to talk to. So if I'm thinking about you over in Hammersmith as well with the bid, is if you've got a few little stories to push out throughout the year, you have, believe it or not, you've got better chance of that big story being picked up if you sent through 3 or 4 smaller releases or just having a chat to the journalists over the course of the year. Also very much worth phoning to introduce yourself. Whether or not you're using an external team, I'll talk about this at the end, but take a moment and think about who you really, really want on your side. So that might be a key columnist in the paper. It might be a local radio presenter who's got really firm ideas on the high street, and actually get them on side, make an introduction, send the release, and then absolutely pick up the phone and make that personal contact as soon as you can afterwards. And finally, it's the positive story, and this is all about Kickstart. While we're here today, it's thinking about fantastic news within your business. So that might be a contract win, it might be a charitable endeavour, it might be a progression of employees, a Kickstart who's then progressed on through the company, or it might be a community good news story. It's harder to get a press win, to be sure, but this is all about building those community and those media network relations. At the end of the day, the story that someone really wants to read is the story that you want to. Oh, sorry. Hang on, sorry, Mark, I've got comms breakdown.
Can you hear us?
Yeah. How's that working? Is that all right?
Yeah, fine. Yeah, is your earpieces? We've
got electricians in the building, I think. Okay, so I'm just thinking about that story that somebody wants to read. You tell you a funny story. At least 3 times a year, I get asked to send out a press release about a new uniform or a new logo hand stitched onto a t-shirt. And I'll be really honest, it's a lovely story within a business, and it might be a really lovely story about the person who's wearing the uniform. But unless this is being hand stitched by 5-year-olds, then this isn't really a newsworthy story. This is just about the fabric of the business. So the challenge with media relations there is to take that basic story and either think about how it progresses to become the positive story for sharing, or thinking actually let's work a bit harder, let's forget about the t-shirt story and let's review what we've done this month, this quarter, this year, and let's try and find some really, really hero good news that's going to be relevant to everybody outside of the business, not just the people who understand who our uniform supplier is. And that probably sounds a little bit harsh, and I'm quite happy to take questions on that, because I know it's very often it's the default route that you can take if you're not sure about how to tackle media relations. It can be a press story about anything. And my advice there is don't do a sanity check on yourself, and don't send the first release out that always comes to mind. Maybe hold back and keep something on the back burner, because really, would you, Mark, would you sit and read a story about a uniform supplier, or would you scroll on by?
Yeah, generally scroll on by. Related to those, the final point, the positive story for sharing, part of the reason why, when we discussed this previously, why I wanted to do this is there has been some negative social media and press around the Kickstart.
Yeah.
And that's why I wanted to get these good stories out, because I don't think the scheme has good enough PR. I don't think, I don't know if the government have put much into it, but I keep getting tagged into negative posts, and actually most of the time the post is about a poor gateway, or it's, they haven't used the scheme properly or whatever. And it's probably like a lot of things, a bigger percentage of people are experiencing a positive experience, but it's the negative experiences that make the
and that's absolutely right. I think very often it's the disaster PR, it's a negative story that sells. It's the sad face on the front of the paper generally gets more traction on a news story than the happy face, and that's just human nature, and social media has really fed into that. I think with something like Kickstarter, it's really important to think about the context of the story and the context for the business, because this is at the heart of it. It is a really good news story. It's positive, not just for where we're coming through in the last 2 years in this country, but it's actually, it could represent quite a big shift in how we view younger people and people who have been out of work for some time. And actually to have those positive stories, I am a firm believer in the tide and the accent of change. And I think the more you see small, short, positive stories, it actually builds up a positive regard over time. And there are a few negative stories, but I think as the system, as the time draws to a close, I would hope that there will be more companies that will take the positive step and actually choose to highlight the benefits to their business and to the young person that they've employed. And by the end of the year, I think we could see a good tide of some really positive stories to come out of this.
And it's interesting, one of the points you made there. So for someone like Nikki, who before we started recording was talking about something she wanted to do about a conference she's going to, does it help to get PR if you've had previous PR and sent previous releases out? You see, rather than just a one hit and then wondering why.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the more PR you can get over time, the better for your business. And if you're sending a series of releases, say related to Kickstart or related to one particular topic, then by all means include all the releases as attachments as well for context. Because the other thing to remember is that the journalism, I don't like it when it's called a fickle industry, because I think journalists work extremely hard, and I think there's huge challenges at the moment. And one of the biggest challenges is the working from home challenge. There is an incredible buzz about working in a newsroom, and those of us that have been there, we generally have chosen that place to work because it's as much of the energy in the space as it is the work that we do. And in the last 2 years, while 18 months while lockdowns happened, those newsrooms, local press as well, have become quite disparate and become quite fragmented. I'm speaking a lot to press who are freelancing or they've been on furlough for a long time, and now they're going back to find jobs, and magazine structures quite changed. And I think for that reason, we can't always assume that the person that we're emailing on the news desk knows our story. Even on a really local level, there could be changes, there could be staff changes. And so the more we can include about the story, that's definitely going to help to get seen. Might be too much to go into today, but I like to create press pages. I like to create media packs on a website so that there is a designated URL that we can direct journalists to. And actually,
I think for everyone here, that's probably quite applicable to have a page underneath your contact page on your website, which is media, and include your back releases there. You don't want to include coverage as well, because there's you need a special license to reproduce that, but by all means include your releases, and also any other assets that might make it easy for the journalist. A big thing in getting your release picked up will be the quality of the writing that you do, and the more work that you can do to make it easy at the other end, you run a higher chance of getting that coverage. So if you can send off pictures, and if you can send off logos and things, but also make it easier for somebody researching late at night or 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning, you know, depending on their shifts, have that page on your website that has your logo, your key people, head cuts and bios, any past releases. So everything is in a really nice package there that you can either download and send off with your releases, or you can just direct people towards. And it's a media footprint. It's not just a digital footprint. It's putting everything in one place for everyone. And I can come back. I can come back to that if you'd like. Should we have a look through the actual release now, do you think, Mark? Would that be?
Yeah, on the subject of making it easier for the journalists, then I think that's a good segue into the press release that you created for us. That's a really good.
Absolutely, yeah, and this this very much has been produced with pickup in mind. So I'm not quite sure how to make this interesting for everyone other than, but I think we'll just have to read through it. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, or just making it completely obvious where it says insert things, that people put that in rather than, you know, leave that in the release and then a journalist thinks, you know, you haven't even bothered to personalize a template, so can't be bothered to put the release in. It
is, and I remember when we were talking about how much detail to go into this, and I have gone really nuts and bolts because it can be overlooked. And if you're working with an agency, the logo at the top is where you would have your PR agency's logo and your business logo. We're not the 1980s anymore. There's no expectation that everyone uses an agency or a freelancer. Business journalists are as used to having direct releases as they are from agencies, and in fact for smaller and community-based businesses, they actually quite like the fact that a business has taken it upon themselves to do the job of their PR and their media relations themselves. Okay. So firstly, call it a press release. Just don't beat around the bush. You don't need to go into fancy headlines here. Make life easier, because it will be bookmarked. If it's not the right time to be dealing with releases, it will go into a news folder and it will come back to you. So by calling it a press release, it makes it easier to discover. It also makes it searchable if you call it a press release as an attachment. Okay, you don't need to take the font size up here. Personal bugbear of mine, you don't need to be in 0.58 or 75. Probably up to about 17 or 18 is sufficient. And I say that really just particularly, this is a thing really from the last 12 months. A lot of the news desks are using their phones now. They're not in offices. And if you've ever tried to open up an A4 document on your phone, if you've got anything above 20 points, you're not going to be able to see it. You're just making life hard. So date, absolutely. And if you re-release the press release 2 weeks after you've sent it, change the date and perhaps make a small amend to the release, or acknowledge in your covering email that you didn't get the pickup or the response that you expected, so you're reissuing it. And the reason we say change the date is because if it's old news, it will literally end in the bin. So if you get a sign off on a Friday and you don't get around to sending it until the Monday, change that date and make it the Monday date. Don't leave it to be the Friday. And also,
can I just ask a question?
Absolutely, yes.
In terms of you're calling it a press release, would you always say press release and not a media release?
You can say media release if that's what you're comfortable with. I'm coming at this very much from being a journalist myself, so I call it a press release, but either is absolutely fine.
Okay, thank you.
That's okay. So yeah, so absolutely include your town or your city, if particularly for local news, and your county. Okay, so thinking specifically about the Kickstart release here, this the lovely 4X's here is where you would insert your business name, and we've got an action word there. We've put the word celebrates in the headline. I'm quite happy to take questions about headlines. Headlines are they're really hard to get right. They're hard to get right as a writer. They're really hard to get right on press releases. My own personal rule here is I try not to write it at the very beginning. I'll very often work my way through the whole release, and then at some point I'll get a brainwave for a headline or right at the end, and I'll come back to it. You can spend 3 or 4 cups of coffee trying to figure out the release headline before you've even started. So definitely don't get too hung up on what that headline has to say. Okay, so your summary headline, this is the point, that this is the piece that the journalist really will read. Again, repeat your name of your business. Town-based, again, this has got the local market in mind, and again we've repeated that word celebrate, and this is just a completely succinct headline. We're celebrating our success with the specific item, which is the government's Kickstart employment scheme. It's old school again in the digital age. It's not quite so important, but we do like to make a differentiation about where the release starts and where the kicker, the 4 stuff finishes. Okay, so again, we're thinking about the positive impact. We're thinking about the positive nature of the story. So there are 6 clauses that you need to get in these first 2 paragraphs, and you may want to take some notes here, but this is essentially who, what, where, why. So it's the 4 major ones. Who is the story about? What are they doing? Where is the story happening? And why? And it's the why clause, which is the wow factor. This is why are the readers, why are the editors interested in the story? And might be a bit harsh here for a Friday afternoon, but if you've gone through the first 3 and you can't answer the why, and you're just getting a bit of a so what, then actually you may need to think about a different story. You may need to think about a different angle to the press release. Okay, so thinking about the UK scheme here, again, we've repeated the business name, we've added a sentence of context. We're thinking about reflecting on the benefits of the programme, and after that we're leading straight into a quote. Okay, and it's really, really important to get that punchy quote as early as you can in the release, just after all the context, because that is the point where the journalist will really stop and read. And on a local level, they'll think about whether they want to carry on, and also the better the quote, the more impactful, the more positive, whatever you're trying to say, then that's making everyone's life really easy, because if it's a really good quote, they won't need to pick up the phone and get a second quote from the source.
Any kind of suggestions there, or what they should say specifically related to this?
I think it's quite acceptable to send out a draft quote and actually have a bit of discussion in the office about what you want to say. I'm a real fan of the round robin approach, because everyone, take 4 people in the department, there's probably 4 slightly different viewpoints, but there will be 1 or 2 that probably run between all 4 people. And I'm really here thinking specifically about Kickstart. This is about the immediate benefit to the business. And it's also a really good place to place your company values. And if you've got any kind of business values around community or education, then you can reflect that here. But also it's a good place to talk about pride and business pride as well, and actually being really proud to have taken the initiative and supported the young person back to work or into work. But also thinking about the positives. This one of the things that I've seen from the businesses that I know that have taken Kickstarters is that there can be a huge quality of candidate here, and because there's been money saved, you can actually jump really, really far into meaningful work. And I think that's the kind of thing that absolutely is newsworthy, and being able to challenge the kind of caliber of candidates and bring people in is ultimately, it's a really positive story.
It's another reason why we wanted to do the press release and the webinar that you're so fantastically delivering for us, is that when we do speak to employers, nearly all of those conversations are around how great the scheme is, you know, how it's taken the risk out for them, how they probably wouldn't have taken someone on board without a scheme like this, given the economic environment and unsure about future lockdowns and all those various different uncertainties with pandemic and Brexit and all that sort of stuff. And most of the experiences of the young people have been brilliant, and it's been really beneficial to their business, and they've recruited someone they might not normally have recruited, or so on and so on. So there's loads of great things to say there. They just need to, like you said, probably brainstorm that stuff. Or
absolutely. And also think it's a really good point to talk to the young person, or talk to the person that's in the Kickstarter position, because they, you know, I think I have to say further down to get them up to quote, but really this needs to be an inclusive conversation for everybody, because it's about the whole business essentially. I think two things. I think that in terms of examples and positivity, then a press release which celebrates a business decision is an asset within the business community as well. And actually you're not just speaking to your immediate customers or your immediate clients. There's every chance that you will be read, depending on your distribution list, by other businesses who are in similar positions. And actually I think there's no more powerful advocacy than seeing that somebody else has taken on a challenge that you were considering taking on yourself as a business. And it can be really empowering to see a positive story. And actually when we're sitting on the fence as business owners or as consumers, reading that positive story and being able to see ourselves in the mirror in another business story is really, really powerful. And that's it's a different side of PR, but it's actually it shouldn't be overlooked at all. Particularly if thinking about the bid down in Hammersmith, particularly if you're in a business space where you're working with a lot of businesses and you're more B2B facing than B2C. The other thing I would say is I've only noticed it recently, but I can see, particularly in marketing and PR and sales exec, there are a lot of training partnerships and a lot of skills partnerships and skills offerings that have popped up specifically to deal with the Kickstarter program. And just thinking about where my business is based, a few of us here on the Chamber of Commerce have been asked to donate skills and time to support Kickstarters, and this is recognizing that businesses kind of want to keep going, but they maybe but while they've had a very good cost saving initially with the hiring cost and the training, actually to keep that young person employed, if we can have some transfer of skills and some collaboration, then there's every chance that particular job can be extended. And I think it is a whole other conversation, but in terms of PR, that's really, really good positive business message. And if you, for example, were to collaborate with another business and offer some kind of training or some mentoring perhaps, that would be another press release for you all. And that's kind of how that's illustrating, I hope, how you start with one release, and then over time you see a progression and you see a story building and you see those relationships grow as you're putting more and more releases out.
So one of the things you could do, as you said, is this might be after they've started or they're halfway through or whatever. Then at the end, if you've taken them on full-time or part-time, or they're converted into apprenticeship or something like that, it's another release to kind of
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think there's always the scope for a story of collaboration or extension, and if you're if you've got a good story and you're struggling to get it out, or you see a similar story from another business in your local area, for example, has got coverage, rather than being kind of a bit browbeaten about it, go straight to that business and have a collaboration conversation and think about where there are commonalities and where sharing a story could actually be beneficial to both parties. And a press release doesn't always have to be a unique story about your business. It can be a business's response to a current situation. So thinking about kickstarting, if there are 5 businesses in the business park in Truro who have taken on Kickstarters and they've got amazing success, and maybe these young people have come together and they've, you know, forming informal mentee-mentor relationships. Actually looking at that kind of group of people, you can very often find a story about collaboration. And thinking about business improvement districts again, just having a look at a collection or a collective of similar sized businesses or similar focused businesses and saying, well, actually, where is there a collective story that we can write which has a positive impact on everybody around here, and it's, you know, probably sound like I'm giving you all more work to do, but do a little bit of legwork and pick up the phone and get emailing and just making contact with people and seeing if you can find another layer to your story. And then you bring that right back to your quote that opens your press release, and before you know it, you've got 4 different quotes from 4 different people, all essentially saying the same thing, which gives a lot more weight, impact and credibility to the story.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
So if you would say you had a joint project or like a joint event or something, or a joint campaign with another organisation, would you recommend submitting one press release jointly or sending them separately to your own distribution lists? And
I would have quite a specific programme to do that, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
And I would timetable it, and I would have an agreement between both parties to stick to the schedule. So I would absolutely have a launch, an announcement that announces the collaboration, and then I would have the opportunity or the timing for each party to issue their own follow-up release at a time that suited them, and then at a suitable juncture in the project, maybe halfway or maybe evaluation at the end, I would put out a success story or a lessons learnt, and I would, as part of that, I would probably have a conversation with both businesses to see how they felt about working with each other and to see if they plan on doing anything similar. And then I'd have a conversation with the press, the local media, to see if they knew of anyone else that was doing a similar thing and if this kind of identified a trend. So what you're doing is you've got one story, but you've already got 4 or 5 different ways to grow, different means of growing that story. Yeah, does that answer, or have I added a layer of confusion there?
No, not at all. That's really interesting. Thank you. And the follow-up sort of phase is one that I hadn't necessarily thought of as being like a formal communication, but that makes a lot of sense actually, because it is a continuing relationship. I think sometimes people have the sort of idea they're just going to leave the story and then move on. Yeah, that's really interesting.
It very rarely finishes like that, for the simple fact that people will still talk about it. And as long as we've got networking events and we're making contact with people, we'll, you know, on a local level, we'll be carrying on these conversations. And it's really nice to see a business story grow like that over a couple of sessions and a couple of examples. Yeah, and that leads quite nicely on, because in order for that story to grow and in order to have that context, you need to have the nuts and bolts. So this next part of the press release is absolutely where you're working it, where you're getting all the elements and all the facts of the story. Now I've written this paragraph quite specifically. In fact, I went through a couple of edits just to make sure that we got everything absolutely right. So we did the press job here. We fact checked, we spell checked, we date checked, and in this example, it's only one paragraph. I mean, this is it's a nice, straightforward story, a Kickstart story. There's anything up to 3 or 4 paragraphs, if there is that much detail, would be absolutely appropriate here. But this is the point where you've introduced the story, you've given your impactful headline, you've given a quote. So this is the point now where the press review will happen, and now they will decide, they will want to know those nuts and bolts. And I do like to put as much in here as possible. So I've been on the other side of the fence, and actually the less work you have to do on press day, the easier. And we're all about those positive relationships. So again, we're thinking about numbers and facts. We're repeating the town, the location, the company, the area, and we're also here, we've chosen this point to introduce the young person. And this is a hero message, and this very much could be the story in its own right. And you could re-release, if you didn't get take up from issue 1, my advice would be to turn it on its head and reissue the release leading with the young person's positive statement, and take a photo of them. I think Mark and I had a quick chat about best practice, really not a Facebook shot. And please check that the person employed has their social media tied down. Just a good bit of employee relations there. We're not at all suggesting that you need to go and get a professional photographer in, but if you can have, a smartphone now that's set to high resolution, will get a good enough quality image for the press, and put the young person outside the building, smiling, maybe with an older member of staff or another employee. And actually it's that human element of the story then. And by having that one photograph, then you can absolutely turn it on its head and leave with the story that Sally's so delighted that she wasn't able to go to university, but she took this Kickstarter job in marketing, and she's absolutely smashing it, and a whole new career path has opened up for her. And
we don't want to get into kind of professional photography here, but what's your opinion on, I was always taught that the picture should convey most of what the words are saying without having to look at it. So it's thinking how do you convey those words without even, or how do they link? Like you said, if you've got a picture that just seems a complete non sequitur, it will kind of confuse a journalist. And
yeah, I think if you're writing a story about being pleased, if you're celebrating, if you've got the word celebrate in your headline, you need some smiling faces there, like really, really fundamentally, in the same way you have the missing dog and the sad face by the railway line, kind of, cliche of have I got news for you, but it's absolutely, we say that for a reason. So have that smiling face, have a confident pose, having 2 people in a picture that actually look like they're at work, so they're perhaps in work clothes, or I've seen some quite good photos recently with people exiting through sliding doors or exiting out of the building, and just trying to have a run with a camera a few times, just trying to get that kind of semi-action shot. Anything which just looks just looks a little bit active is good. And hopefully no sad faces by the kettle in the coffee room, because but by all means put that brand name there.
In terms of getting a quote from the young person, as a professional journalist, what sort of questions, because sometimes part of the reason why these people are on the scheme is, or our experience of the people on the scheme is, they're not the front of the queue of the blaggers and the people who are brilliant at selling themselves. That's part of the reason why some of them are on the scheme, because they needed help with self-confidence and those sort of things. So what questions could you ask them to get them to elaborate rather than
honestly, trying to get that quote from the young person, I would hope that somebody within the business was mentoring them enough to have a conversation with them a couple of times, particularly early in the recruitment process and the start time, and then a couple of weeks down the line, and actually starting to have those how are you conversations, and is everything as you found it, because not just because that's good business practice, but actually because it's that relationship which makes asking those questions so much easier. My rule of thumb would be to have an informal conversation, not necessarily to diarise it with a calendar request, but just have a loose kind of booking to check in. And really, it really comes down to the young person and their confidence, because some people will absolutely blossom at sitting face to face in a formal setting with a coffee or a whiteboard or whatever. And there's other people that will absolutely clam up and won't be able to talk. And it's at that point that you get the phone out and you do it over, even if it's an internal call, do it over the phone. There's a reason why, as journalists, we would quite often meet somebody in a completely neutral location, or at an event, go for a walk around, just actually having that opportunity to side by side, a bit like talking to teenagers, really, just not in that kind of face-to-face space, which can be a bit more interviewing, a little bit more confrontational perhaps. In terms of starting that conversation, you're trying to encourage the I message. You're trying to encourage that young person to say, you know, I feel, I like, I believe. And in order to get those kind of answers back, you need to be not creative with your questions, but you need to be prepared to offer some examples yourself. And it's quite often overlooked now, because we do so much on email and so much, you know, we rattle things off so quickly. But take a little bit of time and prepare, and have up to 9 or 10 questions. And then if you meet with quick one-word staccato answers, then you've got enough time to fill a quote. But also there will be something within those 10 questions that sparks an interest, and you maybe have 3 or 4 sentences of conversation out of it, which is ultimately what you want. Is you want to have that little conversation, because that's where the best quotes come, is when they're really, really conversational, and perhaps your guard is down a little bit.
Yeah, okay, thanks for that.
Yeah, that's why. So that was quite a long answer, wasn't it, Mark?
I have another question. I don't know if it's a good time.
Sure.
Don't want to hold up the session. It's quite a practical one. When you send a release, it's usually in the form of an email with an attachment, I presume. In terms of sort of attaching those assets, like those pictures, headshots, access to logos and things, anything else that they might kind of that might make the journalist's life easier. Do you think it's easier to sort of attach that all to the email, or sort of have a link to a page on your website or something? Or
I've actually changed what I do quite significantly since lockdown, and I'm realizing that a lot of the press that I was dealing with were limited by storage on their phones, or domestic, you know, a cloud server at home that maybe didn't have the same capacity as an office. So I do 2 things now. I copy and paste, if it's a short release, I copy and paste the release into the email body itself and put that in between my name and my signature, or at least give the meat of the release, so that you don't have to physically click on anything to open up. I also send my releases as Word documents or plain text documents, not as PDFs anymore. Again, that comes down to software and being able to copy and paste easily from a Word document, and then maybe having the read software for a PDF. In terms of images, if it's a brand new publication that I'm dealing with, I will pop a phone call or a quick email to let them know that a release is coming and who best to speak to, just to prep them. But also I gather everything together in a folder, and I date it and I name it, and I keep it on my desktop. And the minute I send a release, I send a separate WeTransfer document. So then there's no risk of corruption. There's no cluttering up of big files, and it means it's all really easy there to download. And I particularly like WeTransfer because you can copy the link, so you can send that link on to other email addresses as well, I think.
That's really interesting. Thank you.
No, you're welcome. And actually, and interestingly, through many of the PR forums in lockdown, that was one of the big barriers to stories being picked up, was physically not being able to check out assets and logos and things. And again,
in a way, it's a bit sad because sometimes we get our designer to do a lovely PDF template. You know, it's really gorgeous. It's got pictures in it. Everything's kind of on brand. But actually, yeah, if you're a journalist on the move or at home, you're kind of going to see that. But it's a bit of a barrier as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. But also, what I would do is I would keep that PDF asset and I would put that on the website. I would put that on your press page. So, and I would include a link to it in the email as part of your signature. So then you've got a very quick way of viewing everything in its entirety. And also it shows that you care and value the story enough to have thought about how it looks and how it's going to be digested. And for me personally, that's a huge thing about positive media relations, is actually showing the journalists that I'm working with that I value the story that I'm sending, but also I value their time, and I'm not spamming 5,000 journalists. I'm picking and choosing carefully who I think is going to want to take the release for their own, you know, editors and their own readers. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we've gone through the nuts and bolts. This is we might call this a boilerplate, but in fact, I've included this in the main release, which is some context. So Kickstart is a really good example, because unless you happen to have had involvement with this in your business or in your network, there's every chance that even now people do not fully understand what Kickstart is. So this is whatever your release is for or about, this is a really good chance to put that context in. And in terms of baseline, it's about recognizing who the common denominator is in the story, and making sure that everyone understands the facts that they need to understand. Okay, so in this example here, we've explained how applications were sought, the fact that Kickstart is related to DWP, and that it funds 100% of the national minimum wage. And we added an extra clause here that the paid wage is age relevant, and employers can choose to top up this wage. And just on the few businesses that we spoke to, we realised a lot of people that have received this template had chosen to top up the wage. And absolutely, if that was, that's another positive element to the story. Okay, thinking about the wider business application, so your business and your local press has got a very, very specific remit, and it's one of a two-way relationship. But stories like this are also sector related, so thinking about small businesses or community businesses, and again, this is the opportunity to think about those businesses, and here today think about sports and activity professionals. This is a really good little chance to interject some context for the organisation that's providing the member benefits. And there's been a huge amount of support that Mark and his team have given. So what we've got here is we've got just 2 short paragraphs just explaining a quote here from Mark about the support that was offered throughout the programme, and that is basically where we are. We've got a really nicely rounded, structured press release with 3 or 4 different angles within one release, so that you don't need to do different versions for different kinds of publications. And then right at the very end, finish with your business name and your role, easy contact email, and hopefully a direct number. And then at the very bottom is the boilerplate, which is the notes for editors. And this is the point. Very often this reiterates what has been said elsewhere in the press release, but I always advocate including this because it's just human nature. We scroll down and we stop at the bottom, so there's every chance that you won't stop along the way, and you might have missed something. So again, here we've got three good examples and links, which again give the story context to make the writer's life easier.
This sounds really, really basic, Rachel, but things like, you know, once you've edited it and it's in red, presumably then you get it all into black so that people don't realize you've just edited a template. And
I would recommend putting it all into black. Yeah.
I mean, this sounds basics, but just from experience of our franchisees when we send stuff out, and just rereading it again, or getting someone to read it yourself, because some of the businesses might not be in a sport or activity sector, and they just said in the template that they're in a sport or activity sector, so they need to, you know, read through it again and kind of go, actually, that doesn't make sense to me. Also, just a quick question as well, or some of the businesses we're sending it to, their Kickstarters will have completed, so they'll, you know, presumably they would just amend the press release to say, you know, in you know, a different tense, that they've had a great experience, this is what's happened.
Absolutely. So we've still got a celebration headline, which is still valid, and this is we use the word reflects here, and actually you can have a positive reflection story for a couple of weeks or maybe a month or so after something has finished, and you can still justifiably put that out as a release. It would be better to do it immediately or at the point of finish, but that isn't always appropriate. It doesn't always fit within an editorial cycle. What I would say is, having made the edits, go through and change everything to be black font for accessibility reasons. That is the easiest to read, and it's also, if you're going to use dictation software, that's the easiest way to use it. But also go through and give it to somebody else in your business who's not read the release, who maybe doesn't even understand the nuances of the story. And I, you know, thinking back to when I was in the press room, we used to get our sales guys or our IT guys to read stuff that we put out, because actually if somebody who's just there for the fabric of the job can understand the story, then actually you've got a winner. And I think that's a really good example. And even if you're a micro business with just a few employees, there will be somebody who you can give something to just top down. And the other thing, and I probably need to live by my own medicine here, because I'm terrible for writing, reading and editing and sending, but try and give it a break, try and leave it overnight and come back to it with fresh eyes and look at it in the morning and check for sends, but also check for typos as well.
Yeah, no, that's really great advice. Is this in, I don't want to step on if you're going to go on to this, but a lot of people won't know where to, you know, they won't be a PR professional like yourself who access to PR web and all those tools and knowing who to send it to. So once they've done the press release, how do they find out who to send it to, and what's the process of that? There are short-term ways to do it. My agency offers a distribution service, and lots of small agencies do, but really for time and for effort, then it's worth keeping a press release, and you can't beat Excel, to be honest. And I think I've spoken, so in terms of getting the release out, this is my rule of thumb. And first is good old search, and I will take to Google and I will search for my local area, and I will search for press, and I will search for radio, and I will search for blogs as well, business bloggers, and then I will switch the tab in Google and I will just do a news search. And that's surprisingly useful, particularly in London and larger cities. There are always small regional and doorstep press that spring up. And so I'd go and I'd find my local press. Then I start thinking about organisations, and I think, well, who potentially might want to receive this story about business. So locally I've got a contact at the Business Improvement District. I work with the Chamber of Commerce. We've got a local education partnership, local enterprise partnership,
and then sort of I just keep a list going that I literally just add to as I see people that might be related to the story. In terms of organisations, the professional support organisations are really good, and if you're thinking about sports groups, I've got contacts at leisure centres and training consultancies that they don't always pick it up, but I think it's quite good for people to know that there's a story happening. And this is the soft side of media relations. It's not just about seeing that name in your business name in print. It's about thinking, well, who in my network needs to know my story? And professional organisation needs that as much as the local press. And in terms of local business networks, we're all looking for content. We're all looking for good stories to share. So that might be the chamber website, it might be a business breakfast, or any kind of Twitter networking groups, those kind of things. And then in terms of local stakeholders, we have one of our local councillors is very, very proactive in the micro business space here and technology space. If I've got a local story to do with a tech startup or women in tech, I generally send a press release to him. I don't expect him to do anything with it other than the note, and I do that because he might not see it. If it makes the local press, he might not see it, or he might not have caught the news bulletin on the radio about it. So just thinking about who those stakeholders are to your business, whether that's activity providers or educators or funding experts. I couldn't really give a definitive list because it's for everybody, but I think taking the time and getting that list and on Excel where you can chunk things out and just have different tabs for different sectors or different.
And that just builds up over time as you said, you send more releases out. And would you say people's best bet are local media and industry press? Are they the two most?
Absolutely. Spend a bit of time and get to know who your live editors are. So there is a business network connected to Reach PLC, which will be your Derby Live, Liverpool Echo, those kind of those kind of local press. Figure out who the writers are, and the best way to find that is on Twitter, because the writers will generally retweet their stories. And it's interesting the way things have changed in recent years. This is a nationally syndicated network now. So if you have a local story, there's every chance it will be picked up on the national syndication, because it's a level playing field, and it's how quite a few regional stories make the nationals, is because they've been spotted in the local press. And with something like Kickstart, if there is a tide of positive stories, then I would expect to see a positive national media story to come, but there needs to be a certain volume of positive stories at the regional level. So what I tend to do is I've got a broadcast list, so I've got my local radio editors and presenters. Always good to spend a bit of time networking, finding out who the researchers are and the producers. And then I've got my local press, and I've got my local stakeholders, and I do subscribe to a media database as well. So I can find specialist press in my field. So if you were looking for B2B press, or Federation of Small Business Magazine, anything like that, you either work with an agency to help you with that list, or you have to do the legwork yourself and put someone on work on Google.
And what's your view on, so the way we used to train all our stuff was kind of pre-internet, so it was, you found the name of the editor on the inside of the local paper or the magazine. So it's all changed since then. But one of the things we used to encourage them to do is to phone the journalists that they wanted to get in and let them know that they were going to send them a press release. And then after they'd sent the press release, phone them afterwards and say, did it ring a chord? Do you need any more information? What's your view on that sort of stuff, and how much of that would you do?
It depends, in all honesty, on regionally and locally, I tend to take to Twitter. I don't know how many people here are active on Twitter, but a lot of journalists hang out there, and a lot of stories get shared via the journal request hashtag. It's also a really good way, if you're going to host your press release on your website, then tweet and tag and tag that local press, that journalist, that researcher in the post. And then you can follow up really straightforwardly, really quickly, like that. I try not to bombard too much, so I might make an introduction phone call, or I might make a follow-up. It's rare that I've got the time to do both. I'm quite mindful of resources, and it's also about learning over time. You get a feel. And Alex, I'm sure you'll find this with bid press, is you'll get a feel for who will pick up the phone to you and who will get that story, and whether somebody wants an exclusive relationship and would like to be the first person to take that story. In terms of business stories, the FSB, if you're an FSB member, the press office there are incredibly helpful, and chambers of commerce locally generally very, very helpful as well. But the most useful thing can be to follow up 5 or 6 days afterwards and ask why, if it wasn't picked up, and just say, can you give me some feedback? Because very often it's going to be, oh crikey, I just forgot, and actually that's good value for you, that's good knowledge for you, because then you can reissue, or you can take the story wider and start thinking about who else will pick it up. And
as a former journalist, having joined the other side of the fence now, poacher turned gamekeeper, or whichever way it is, how many press releases would you get a day, a week, and how do you stand out versus, because presumably because it's easier to do this sort of stuff yourself, journalists are getting more press releases. And
I remember the dark days of faxes, and literally at 10 o'clock in the morning you didn't want to be anywhere near the fax machine, because it would just be going and going and going. And email, I think don't be over familiar. If you don't know who you're talking to, don't presume that familiarity. And a lot of and you don't need to spend lots of time writing opening sentences introducing yourself. Actually, if you're just going to send a press release, just say that that's what you're going to do, and offer the opportunity for a call. In terms of subject lines, it's so important on email, and I'm in the camp that says call it a press release, and absolutely be clear that what you're sending is a press release. Some of my colleagues would disagree with that, and honestly, as a journalist, it's personal preference, and at least if you know that it's a press release, you can archive it, you can star it, you can Zapier it, and then you can deal with it at the time that you can deal with it. If you're trying to call it something clever or insinuate that it's good news when it might not be good news, then actually you run the risk of not being picked up at the time that's been allocated to deal with it.
And
it's really hard, and I'd love to sit here and say that every single release I get gets the coverage that it deserves, but actually sometimes you have to work it a bit harder.
Yeah, no, I could tell you some stories and stuff we did that didn't get picked up, and then something resonates a chord, or it's a quiet news week, or you catch them at the right time or whatever, and there's an element to look to this, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think no to Friday afternoon and no to Monday morning is as much of an issue or a rule of thumb now as it was 25 years ago. In fact, I've got some releases here that I didn't get out this morning, which will hold. They're not particularly time sensitive, and they will probably go out Monday afternoon or Tuesday morning now. I do keep in touch. If I'm working at the weekend, I do keep in touch with desk editors over the weekend, and I might tweet them, or just find out what they're looking for. I don't know if, Alex, are you on Twitter? Are you on Twitter as a bid, or are you on Twitter individually, personally?
I'm on it individually, but I don't really use it sort of for bid related stuff individually, but we are on Twitter as a bid, and we quite often engage that way.
It would be worth considering setting up a press office account for the bid and using that alongside your personal and alongside the bid business, because of the journo request hashtag, and also as a means of introducing yourself. And the beauty of having a press account, and I know this isn't, I've picked on you because I'm not sure about the other businesses, it's not always practical for a smaller business, but if you are a journalist stuck for content and it's Sunday afternoon, you're going to start looking to your network. And again, this is why I say Twitter is such a lovely space for it. Is it's easier to manage than a Facebook search, in all honesty. And the archive function, and just from a content management and search function, Twitter is there's a reason why it's still used, and it's with good reason, I think.
Rachel, can you just elaborate on what you mean by a press account?
Okay, so I would call it press at. So I would call it press at the Hammond Agency or media. So whatever your business is, I would consider creating a Twitter handle, which is just press at, and then the business name or the organisation name, because that could be the point that deals with media inquiries, and that can be the point that tweets not only your good news, but also the good news within your network as well. So it's you're giving a really good opportunity for people to see that you're confident in the space that you're in, and that you're somebody worth looking out for because you are news aware. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And I'm just thinking in terms of, we're going to start campaigning and lobbying, and so that's going to be really important in that sense, isn't it?
That would be really, really useful. And also you can say, if you have a personal Twitter account, then you can reference the press at account in your bio, and your organisation, and again in your Twitter bio, or you can have it as a pinned post which says for press inquiries or for stories, please use this account, and just use them side by side. So you won't get the massive amount of followers as you would on your main business account, but what you can do is you can really use it to find that journalist, and particularly if you're thinking about lobbying and working on a national level, start really niching down and spending a bit of time. I mean, I quite often run sessions just on Twitter for press relations, because it's such an underused and misunderstood tool, but it is such a brilliant space to find those conversations and to find the journalists, because they change jobs so often, but they all keep, they keep their Twitter handle regardless of what publication they're working for, in my experience.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Rachel, what's your view on kind of what we've described as alternative media? Everyone's a publisher now, aren't they? And they've got their own blog and website and stuff like that. So would you try and engage with those sorts of people, or?
I absolutely would. And just thinking about, let's just recapping really quickly. Your press release example is news in its own right for your business, and this is news that you own. This is your owned media, your owned content. So absolutely think about where you are as a business. So think about Instagram, Facebook or Twitter. You may or may not be on Pinterest or LinkedIn. I've just put the 3 main social tools there, but also it can be a really, really good blog topic, and it can be a very good podcast topic. I think podcasts are they're challenging to manage as a business, but in terms of communicating a direct message, they are the ultimate owned media and the ultimate self-publishing tool. And depending on how often you're engaging the press and chatting to them, then thinking about that as an asset at the end of it is really good practice. Not least just for the story, but for SEO. And we've spoken about digital footprint and digital assets and media assets. Wherever you're listed online, you're increasing your digital footprint and those backlinks. So you think you've got your press release there, and you've put it out onto your social channels, you've created your press archive, you've got your blog. also think about summarizing something for Google My Business for that listing or for your LinkedIn page. And on Google Business particularly, you can offer separate updates or you can offer longer articles, and on LinkedIn you can offer longer articles. So if you have a business account for LinkedIn, absolutely take that press release and issue it as an article to your personal page or to your business page. And it's kind of taking this self-publishing tool, it's a bit further, it's using it a bit more wisely, because you're still retaining control, and depending on how well you're looking at your Google Analytics and your website data, over time you'll be able to figure out where are the platforms that you need to be. And it might not be the BBC story that got you the most coverage, it might have been your local press that actually got you more traffic to your website. So, which is an interesting one to look at, because as writers and PRs, we focus everything on that big national coverage, but very often it can be the niche expert publications or the local press that actually give us the meaningful website traffic that we really need. Yeah. Oh, we've covered a lot today, haven't we?
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, well, I think that is it. And I think at this point, I was just going to say good luck and invite questions, but I think I know we've had quite a few questions there.
Yeah.
Already. I'm sure there's more there, and I've got plenty of time.
I'm sure there's loads more questions, and you've put your Twitter handles on there and Instagram and all those sorts of things, so people can go if they want to. We'll send out the slides to the employers along with the video, so that they can, and if any of them, are you okay if any of them get in touch afterwards and so on and so forth?
Absolutely.
Because the thing I'd say to people that are, you know, this is a how-to sort of guide, but if you haven't got the time, or, you know, this sounds like a lot of expertise that you don't have, then, you know, I'd just use someone like you to personalize it and send it out, or once they've personalized it, send it to you, and you can send it on their behalf, because, you know.
Absolutely. That's what we do. We do a lot of content, but we do a lot of media relations and campaign management for businesses that don't have the time, and we also offer a distribution service as well, B2B or sector specific. So yeah, please, if that's something that you need help with, then yeah, drop me a line. Quite happy to talk to you.
So unless anyone else has got any specific questions, then we'll thank Rachel for her time, and you know, we're very grateful for you doing it and passing on your years of expertise and skill and experience in 90 minutes.
So my pleasure. It's been lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, we were really grateful. It's such a tricky area, but such an important area for business.
It's a really tricky one to get right. And I think if I could wrap up with one thing, it would be to just get over the fear and do it. And there's nothing worse than sending that first press release. And actually, once you've got over that first hurdle, you'd be amazed how much easier you find the second one to be, because it's not tricky, but it's hard to get right. And I think that it's because of the time that it takes. A lot of businesses don't do it. So just by putting yourself out there and taking the time to get that release out, then you're putting yourself out there and doing all the most to raise your own profile as well. Yeah, good luck.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. That's a lot to chew on. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
No problem.
Thank you, Rachel. It's really useful.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you very much indeed. Really helpful tips as well. I'm definitely going to employ some
Find me
of
on
them.
Twitter, Alex.
Okay, thank you, Rachel, and thank you everyone for participating and asking such relevant questions and getting involved. We really, really appreciate it. So we'll wrap up for now, and thank everyone for participating. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone. Bye.